This is the neighborhood of Little Portugal, located over here in Toronto. As usual, we'll begin in the northern portion of the neighborhood and make our way from there. Over here, making up the northern border of Little Portugal, is the major, vibrant, streetcar-lined street of College Street. Along it, as well as compact homes, are diverse, eclectic, quite trendy shops on the ground floors of well-kept, varied-colored, old brick buildings which host apartments above. These shops, interspersed at various points by lively graffiti on the corners of narrow streets and alleyways, are terrific for walking around and getting a bite to eat from an eclectic, often Portuguese, bakery or restaurant. This is perhaps true to the largest extent in and around the summertime, where the lovely trees along the street blossom and the place is most vibrant, with nice patios outside storefronts making for an excellent place to relax and savor the activity. The most prominent intersection around here is with Dufferin Street, which is a major north-south street in the neighborhood, and the city more broadly, for that matter. Along Dufferin Street are mostly compact, attached or very close residential homes, generally with dense yards just behind the narrow sidewalk. These places vary from dense row houses to homes that look like this and this, all right beside each other along the road. These homes are also prevalent along the tranquil, meandering streets that lie either side of Dufferin, where distinct, eclectic home variations intertwine along the often windy, mostly narrow, tree-lined residential streets. Pleasantly tucked away from the hustle and bustle, these places have a somewhat disjointed yet charming atmosphere to them in parts, due to the sheer diversity of houses and lots, as well as the neighborhood streets' direction and width. Placed in a quite decent location in eclectic Little Portugal to begin with, and not so far away from downtown, which lies to the east, and Hyde Park, which sits not too far to the west, these charismatic places are quite desirable. This generally explains why home prices can fetch around $2 million, everyone, though many of those places were once much more humble. A few streets in the neighborhood that caught my eye were Mackenzie Crescent, which has a wonderful array of Victorian homes in the midst of lush trees, and Beaconsfield Avenue, particularly in the southern portion of it. Just look at some of these estates. Another neat street that I found was Brockton Avenue, which is secluded just off Brock Avenue and has some quite enticing looking properties which face adjacent garages. A prominent Portuguese population resides in Little Portugal because, it's Little Portugal. They came here primarily in the 1950s and 60s, stretching into the 70s when Portuguese immigration began to Canada. Since then, they have more or less made this area their home, as well as turned it into the vibrant, eclectic cultural enclave that it is today, with Portuguese shops and restaurants dotting the aforementioned College Street and also Dundas Street West, which is a main commercial strip in the area, and what we'll turn our attention to now. Streetcar-lined Dundas Street over here runs right through the heart of the neighborhood, and, with compact, colorful storefronts overlooking the tree-lined, crowded street, is the location of much of the neighborhood's vibrancy. Exploring the diverse, bustling, artsy strip in the midst of energetic graffiti on the corners of avenues and parquets, and gleeful apartments sitting atop mingled shops which make up the lowest floor of compact brick buildings, you'll find some varying arrangements. This building, right on the corner with Sheridan Avenue, is a good example of that. This is a modern glass building and, among other things, is a representation of the gentrification that is enveloping this area, and rather swiftly as well, as it's one of the primary themes to do with the neighborhood, with rough turning into polished, modest becoming expensive, and new taking old's place. This gentrification is prevalent to perhaps the largest degree down here in the neighborhood, around mightily eclectic Queen Street West, where quite fancy modern buildings sit just on the south side of, and host tidy storefronts along the street on their first story. These stores sit below pricey condos where influxing, well-to-do folks reside. This is a symbol of the newfound prosperity that the neighborhood encountered as a result of gentrification, though the results of change have been more nuanced on the whole. Although gentrification enabled upward mobility and prosperity in the neighborhood, there's always the concern of pricing out many, if not most, of the communities that originally turned the place into somewhere worth gentrifying. These contemporary arrangements stretch south and lie by these train tracks, taking the place of the formerly far less pristine land, and making the area more polished, leaving their flashy mark on the surroundings through their comparative height alone. The only section of this area not made up by modernity is this little section, which sits along Dovercourt Road, the street that makes up the neighborhood's eastern border, and is where quite nice, older homes contain tall trees and vegetation of sorts on their relatively compact yards. Speaking of Dovercourt, as you head north along the road, you'll see some quite fashionable-looking houses. The strip along Queen Street makes up the western portion of the territory often known as West Queen West, which was featured in Vogue magazine as literally one of the coolest neighborhoods in the world. Everyone. Although that title might be debatable, with shady trees sitting in the fronts of vibrant, colorful, varied and trendy shops and, among other things, cafes, all standing on the north side of the road, you'd probably be lying if you said that this in-fashion, streetcar-lined strip wasn't at the very least cool. This strip wasn't always this way, though. In the past, it had the undesirable reputation of poverty, drug problems, and crime. Formerly the occupation of vacant warehouses, it has been rejuvenated in large part by artists into the thriving strip that it is today. One particular place of note on the stretch is the Drake Hotel, which, opened in 2004, is an iconic, boutique, artsy location, classic for overnight stays, in addition to live music and gourmet food in the restaurant, which overlooks the trendy street. The Drake has undergone an expansion into the neighboring buildings, with a multitude of new rooms being added. Jeff Stober, the original founder of the Drake, whom Toronto Life wrote of as colonizing Queen West, is the man behind this. Just west along Queen Street, at the corner of Queen and Gladstone Avenue, is another notable icon, which is Gladstone House. First opened back in 1889, and after enduring a time of some troubles in the late part of last century, as did the surrounding areas, now renovated Gladstone is a landmark contemporary boutique featuring art throughout the building, all which combines to let off a lively flair to the place. Also, the outside of the building and the Romanesque revival looks quite gorgeous. This site, with 37 unique rooms, was bought by the developers behind the Distillery District and Broadview Hotel a few years back. Queen Street comes to a halt in the neighborhood at these train tracks, which curve around and make up the southern and western borders. These tracks, which connect to Union Station not so far away, add a somewhat distinct shape to the neighborhood and are a component of what shapes the at times twisty or dead-end neighborhood streets around. These tracks curve along in the neighborhood until they're meeting with Dundas Street West, which runs over the rails in the northwestern corner of the neighborhood, right around Lansdowne Avenue, and the tail western end of College Street, both of which make up a sort of neat triangle island with Dundas. Over here, where a part of the track tails off and changes course, sits a No Frills, which is a sizable supermarket. In the more inner neighborhood, St. Anne's Anglican Church is a pretty notable site. The original church, established back in 1862, faced Dufferin Street, though St. Anne's expanded when the present-day Byzantine-style building facing Gladstone Avenue was built in the early 1900s. In the early 1920s, the interior decorations of the new church began, as a group of Canadian artists were assembled by J.E.H. MacDonald. This included the two sculptors Florence Weil and Francis Loring, as well as members from the renowned Group of Seven. They all contribute to the prestige and classy decadence that the National Historic Site's glamorous, gorgeous interior lets off to this day, drowned in fine, carefully made decor, with details showcasing the hard work and artistic talent that most of us could only dream of. Another place that's of note in the neighborhood is McCormick Park, which is a 1.5 hectare park that contains baseball, a playground, and a wading pool. The park is right beside McCormick Arena and Mary McCormick Recreation Center, which I played soccer at in the past. Otherwise, some other notable places in the neighborhood are Mondelez Canada Inc., which is a manufacturer, and the Darling Mansion along Dovercourt Road on the eastern border, which is an accommodation inside of a quite spectacular home. Rounding off the video now, some schools in the neighborhood include Shirley Street Junior Public School and Cityview Alternative Senior School, as well as Alexander Muir Gladstone Avenue Junior and Senior Public School. So, in conclusion, it's not too far from High Park, it's not too far from downtown, and it's not too far from the lake. However, even without those draws, a diverse array of shops, homes, and people give Little Portugal appeal in itself.